once again, fight fans, to another episode of Career Profiles. Today's episode is all about one of the greatest defensive fighters of all time. Of course, we're talking about Sweet Pea, Pernell Whitaker. Now, before we get into the episode, please go and check us out on social media at career_profiles on Twitter, and also the BTR Boxing Podcast Network Facebook page to get all the latest episodes of the Career Profile series, plus the Legendary Nights and the Darker Side of Boxing series as well. If you've not already subscribed to the podcast, you can do so by checking us out on Apple Podcast or Google Podcast or Stitcher, Spreaker, Player FM, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast basically. If you've not already left a rating, please leave us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. Get the word of mouth out there about the Career Profiles podcast. Now, without further ado, this is the Career Profile of Sweet Pea, Pernell Whitaker.
Presenting the IBF and the WBC lightweight champion of the world, Pernell Sweet Pea Whitaker.
So it's another Career Profile, and this time it's one of the greatest fighters. Well, it's always one of the greatest fighters, isn't it? Come on, this is Career Profiles, for God's sake. We're doing some of the most greatest names that the sport has brought to us. And yet again, we've got another name to bring to you guys today. Picked by yourself, Johnston, it's Sweet Pea, or Sweet Pea, as you'll find out through the episode. It's Pernell Whitaker, of course. We're going to be going through his life and times outside of the ring, and of course, his career inside of the ring. This is a fantastic pick from yourself, Johnston. It's one that I know we've been meaning to do for quite a while, and I'm really excited to get into this one.
Yeah, same here. I really do enjoy talking about these great fighters, and Pernell Whitaker is certainly that. He's not a four-weight world champion for nothing. We will obviously go into that. He was just a natural fighter. He had a dazzling amateur career, just a masterful boxer, really. He had everything. He had great ability, and today, if he was sort of around social media, you could just imagine the storm he would be kicking up with his fantastic ability in the ring, which we will go into. But a great little career profile that we can discuss it. And as I say, I picked it because he had actually died last month. So that was the main reason why we did it. Looking forward to going through this one.
And as always, then, fighter fans, we're going to be going through his life chronologically, giving you a bit of context to where it all began for Pernell, of course, and how his career formed the legendary Hall of Fame career that he ended up with. So, at the beginning, it all started on January the 2nd, 1964, when Pernell Whitaker was born in Norfolk, Virginia, which is a coastal city known for its military bases and its tough neighbourhoods. He was raised in the housing projects of Young Park to his parents, Raymond and Novella Whitaker, along with his 2 brothers and 4 sisters. Now, his parents provided a stable home life in a challenging place to live and preached the virtues of hard work and self-discipline. They urged Pernell to do his homework and stay in school, and they encouraged him to find sports that would fill the need for exercise and competition.
Good, not a bad upbringing. It's a good way for his parents, a good mentality, and he seemed to have had a good, stable family home. It was just he was brought up in tough neighbourhoods, so difficult for Pernell growing up. And Pernell is one of those guys that didn't really speak too much of himself when he was younger. So we've found some stuff online, sourced some information, and this was from the Daily Press article, which wrote about a young Whitaker's life on the housing project in Young Park on April 30th, 1989. And this is what it read. It said, "It is the early 70s. Raymond Whitaker has just got back from his job. Pete, the youngest of 7 children, runs into the house. One of the younger kids had belted Pete in the head with a stick. There was blood on Pete's face. Raymond calmly washes away the blood and dries his son's tears. Then he delivers a lecture. Find that boy and beat him. Go at him with everything you've got. Put him down and make him understand that even a stick won't help him from now on. Make the other boys understand that they will be working overtime if you want to punch the clock against Pete Whitaker. You can't fight against all of them. You have to walk away from most of them, but use everything you've got this one time. They will get the message." And marked with that game plan, young Pete went out and took care of business.
That's one way to take care of business, isn't it? I think it's great advice. I think a lot of kids at that age, myself included, had that advice from parents. You know, basically say if someone was out there and he was bullying you or they was trying to hurt you, then the only way to do something about it was to stand up, usually go and hurt the biggest one of the lot of them, and stamp your authority, showing that you weren't a walkover. And that's certainly the advice that Raymond Whitaker gave to his son. Now, in 1973, when Pernell Whitaker was 8 years old, he was fighting on the streets with someone from the neighbourhood. Clyde Taylor, who was a postman by day and a youth boxing coach by night at the Young Park Recreation Centre, witnessed the scuff, and he immediately stepped in to stop it, and he said, "If you want to fight, then come down to the centre where you can do it right." Clyde Taylor took an immediate shine to Whitaker when he saw that he had high potential to be something special. After Taylor was given permission from his parents to join the centre, Whitaker soon fell in love with the art form of boxing. Taylor would take him to the fights at the Navy base and observe only how the fighters moved their feet and how they measured their distances. Now, after finishing his homework, he would head straight to the recreation centre to train, where he would stay until his mum called him home for dinner. They lived close to the gym, so knowing where young Pernell was at all times must have been a great comfort for his parents, considering all the other temptations that the street offered. He never quite managed to avoid all that the streets offered.
Yes, he didn't, and it's something that we'll go into at some point with Pernell throughout his whole career, which is alleged, but we will obviously discuss that at length. Now, although small in frame, he did manage to earn respect on the streets as a tough kid, participating in street fights at a very young age. He began applying his trade that he had been taught on the rough housing projects, where he would size up his opponents before actually going for the kill. And Whitaker actually recalled in his own words, he said, 2 minutes and 2 seconds. That's about how long most street fighters are good for. And they get tired. And once they're tired, I own you. You've sold your soul to the devil. A great line there from Pernell. And when he was 10, he fought at the Norfolk area for the first time. And many observers were actually quite amazed by his instincts in the ring and the understanding of the sport at such a young age. And by 13, he was battling sailors from the nearby naval base, which obviously the coastal area of where he lived. A great analogy on how you fight and what he had learned at that young age.
Now, in the amateurs, Whitaker began to flourish, travelling all over the country and meeting fighters on the circuit that would eventually represent the US boxing team in the 1984 Olympics. Due to his extraordinary talent, it wasn't long before he was named as the US boxing team captain and would later become the leader of one of the greatest Olympic boxing teams that the country had ever produced. Names that would be forever written into the US boxing history books included Meldrick Taylor, Matt Breland, Frank Tate, Evander Holyfield and Virgil Hill, all of which would go on to become world champions in the pros. It was reported by one of Whitaker's Olympic team members, who spoke of his exploits outside the ring sometime after that, said, "Someone took his piss test after every fight. It is rumoured that Whitaker was smoking crack cocaine very early in his life, and sadly, drug addiction would plague Whitaker throughout his whole career, although he would never have even thought that given the performances that he produced."
I mean, we just spoke of that. That was basically the rumour and the myth, if you want to call it that. I believe it's probably true. A lot of people around Pernell said that, you know, this is the sort of lifestyle he lived outside the ring, which is crazy considering just how much of a fantastic fighter he was. And if it was that early where people were taking piss samples for him, so he's got clean piss samples, that is pretty incredible. Now, his parents gave him the nickname Pete after one of his uncles, and he was addressed as Pete by his friends and family. When he began to emerge as a top amateur, Whitaker adopted a new nickname. Fans in his hometown of Norfolk used to chant Sweet Pete, but this was misunderstood by a local sports writer as Sweet Pea, and it's stuck ever since, hence why he's now Sweet Pea and not Sweet Pete. It's just a fascinating story, if anyone never knew that. We did speak about this before when we done the Olympic podcast. Definitely had to bring it up again. Yeah, Sweet Pete was his real name, and the Sweet Pea stuck ever since.
Sweet Pea fought a lightweight throughout his amateur career, won his first major competition in 1982, which was the National Amateur Athletic Union Championships. but lost to two-time Olympic gold medalist and Cuban legend Angel Herrera Vera at the final of the 1982 World Amateur Championships in Munich in Germany. Now, after suffering a second loss, he was able to avenge both defeats on 4 different occasions, notably in the final of the 1983 Pan American Games in Caracas, Venezuela. In February 1984, he participated in a box-off between the USA and Cuba that was featured on ABC's Worldwide of Sports, and once again, Whitaker faced Herrera in the final, defeating him on points.
At the 1984 Budweiser World Championship Challenge in Los Angeles, Whitaker recovered from a first-round knockdown to beat Cuban Raymond Correa in the final. After the victory, Whitaker told Harold Cosell, "I'll go back to the gym and rectify the mistakes I made in this fight." This was supposed to be the dress rehearsal for the 1984 Olympic final, but unfortunately, Cuba joined the Soviet-led boycott, leaving the door open for Whitaker. The next step for Pernell was to qualify for the home Olympic Games by progressing through the US trials at Fort Worth, which happened in June. In the quarterfinals, Whitaker stopped Clifford Gray in the third round, thrashed Anthony Haskins 5-0 in the semis before cementing his place in the US team with a 3-2 victory over Southpaw Joe Belinek in the final. Whitaker spoke with Cosell after the fight, and he said, "I knew I had to go side to side against another left-hander, so I tried to carry him to the right for the whole fight. I knew no doubt once Mark Breland made it, I had no doubts that I could make it. I came out to fight extra hard. Me and my half-brother will go together," which is something I didn't know. I didn't realise that he was his half-brother was Mark Breland. And Cosell actually told him not to load up so much when he goes to the Olympics. He was trying to look for a knockout, or at least daze the guy, sort of neglected his natural ability. And Whitaker responded, "No doubt, didn't I look like Muhammad Ali?"
With the US Olympic boxing team now confirmed and Whitaker named as the captain, he became really close friend with Biggs, Holyfield, Taylor and Breland. All the guys hooked up in Detroit to train at Emanuel Stewart's famous Kronk Gym. Emanuel was a trainer that they all felt comfortable with and knew well because of his affiliation with amateur boxing at the time. With 18-year-old Pernell being a lefty, he was asked if he wanted to spar with the current WBC super featherweight champion Hector Macho Camacho, and Stewart recalls the session at first hand. And in his own words, he said, "I'm the only one who can tell you the real story because, except for a few fighters and handlers, I'm the only one who saw it. Some Americans on the 1984 Olympic team were training at my gym, and Whitaker came to Detroit to see his Olympic teammates. Camacho was training for a fight against a left-hander, and I suggested that maybe Whitaker, being a lefty, might want to go a few rounds with Camacho and help him get ready. Whitaker wasn't warmed up, but he beat the hell out of Camacho for 3 rounds. He beat up on the Macho Man and Hector couldn't touch him. Camacho and his trainer Billy Giles and his manager were embarrassed and really pissed off. Giles told Hector to go and get Whitaker while he turned his back and prepared to exit the ring. So Hector grabbed him around the head from behind, held his head under a rope and actually tried to hit him. We had enough fighters around to break it up, but things got real ugly after that. Giles and I had a lot of bad words, and he and I even almost got it in right there in the ring at the time."
That's a great story there from Emanuel Stewart, and by the sounds of it, he was pissed off himself and ready to have it out with Giles. Interesting, it just shows you how good Pernell was at this early stage of his career. Now, Stewart actually did squash rumours that a gun was drawn from his office to get Giles and Camacho to leave the gym. In his own words, he said, "No, gun was never used. It was just a case of they were embarrassed because Whitaker beat the crap out of a world champion." Whitaker never actually spoke of the incident, but he did say that he turned down an offer to spar with Camacho when he became a professional. And he said, "Camacho asked, 'Why don't you spar with me?' I said, 'I'm here to fight Freddie Pendleton, and that's it.'" And we'll go into the Freddie Pendleton fight later on, but it just shows you that Pernell just had this aura about him. He knew he bashed up Camacho. When he moves on his career, he didn't fancy sparring him. A great story there from Emmanuel.
With Pernell Whitaker being highly ranked for the 1984 Summer Olympic Games, he bypassed the first round and went straight into the second round, where he went on to beat the Nicaraguan Omar Mendez 5-0. Whitaker then went on to whitewash Jeffrey Neko of Uganda in the next round before beating the West German Rainer Geis in the quarterfinals, setting him up in a semi-final with the South Korean Chun Chil-sung. Once again, it was another 5-0 victory, but this time it was considered to be one of the most controversial pro-American decisions that actually happened a few times during that Olympic Games. Now, in the final, Whitaker was up against Puerto Rico's Luis Ortiz, who'd received a standing 8 count with only 3 seconds left in round 2, forcing his handlers to throw in the towel and in turn giving Whitaker the gold medal. Whitaker is actually credited with an amateur record of 201 wins and 14 losses, with 91 coming by way of knockout. But he actually claimed in his own words to have fought over 500 contests. What an absolute amazing amateur record that would have been if that would have gone down in history.
Unbelievable. I mean, the 201, 14 and 91 KOs ain't bad, but if he really did compete in over 500, obviously some of them just not put on record, but it'd have been interesting to see his record after 500 odd. I think he probably would have done pretty well, to be fair, by the sounds of things. And not long after the Olympics, Sweet Pea signed with the Duva family when he turned professional, which had established a new promotional company at the time called, as we all know now, Main Events. Lou Duva, the head trainer, had emerged to the forefront of the boxing world by signing Whitaker and another 4 members of the 1984 US Olympic team, and they were Mark Breland, Meldrick Taylor, Tyrell Biggs, and Evander Holyfield. Now, Lou's late son, Dan Duva, was the promoter. George Benton was the co-trainer, a former boxer in the middleweight division that is actually accredited with that technique, the shoulder roll technique. And Shelley Finkel, who had merged his Monitor Promotions company with Main Events, and he was the manager. They were able to very quickly rival the 2 biggest promoters in boxing at that time. And they were, Bob, I was lying yesterday, Aram and that dodgy Don King.
They always have to come up, don't they? Literally every episode that we do, these 2 guys come up in some capacity, and yet again, both of them are here in the episode with Pernell Whitaker. Now, Whitaker himself made his debut on November the 15th, 1984, in front of 19,000 fans, alongside that class of 1984, which included Breland, Taylor, Biggs and Holyfield. They were all on the same card, which is appropriately labelled Night of Gold. Now, admission into the Madison Square Garden was actually completely free, with all the bouts being shown live on ABC. Whitaker outshone his Olympic counterparts in a one-sided beatdown against the undefeated Ferenc Comu, who was 11-0, and he earned $75,000 in his pro debut. Putting Whitaker in the ring against someone with a decent record like that just showed how highly they actually regarded him after such a glittering amateur career. In Burt Sugar's book, Boxing's Greatest Fighters, he said that Pernell put on a display of moves unseen since the heyday of Willie Pep. Another admirer of Sweet Pea's style was Jesse James Leha, who had participated in several training camps with Whitaker when the two were with the same promoter, and he said in his words, "We used to joke around and laugh a lot. He liked to sit on the ropes and stoop down real low and make you miss during sparring. So I decided the next time he did that, I was going to knock his foot out from under him. And I did. And he fell right on his arse. He said, 'You got me on that one.'"
Good little story there. And that's something that we know with Pernell. The getting low and sitting on the ropes, we'll discuss that in a fight in a moment. Now, Whitaker married Ravonda Anthony in the boxing ring at Virginia Beach Pavilion Convention Center on December 1985. And Ravonda said before the wedding, "I always wanted a church wedding, but since we can't seem to keep Pete out of the boxing ring, I guess it's the best place." He actually got married in an actual boxing ring, which is a great little story there. And the couple did go on to have 4 children together, 3 sons, Devon, Dominique and Dan Tivius, and a daughter called Tiara. But they later divorced, and Whitaker did have another son from a previous relationship, and their son was called Pernell Whitaker Jr. And on August 10th, 1985, Hector Camacho outpointed Jose Luis Ramirez to win the WBC lightweight title. And in his post-fight interview, he called out Whitaker, who had only just won his 5th fight the month before. Camacho also made racial references to Pernell in this interview, clearly still seething from that beating he had received the year before. Now, after Whitaker knocked out Teddy Hatfield, who was a 15-11-1 guy in 3 rounds, 19 days later, to go 6-0 with 5 KOs, he was asked about Camacho's comments, and he said, "Hector Camacho is a great fighter, and you have to give him respect, but I'm coming up, and I'll take him. I've been dreaming about it every day. when me and Camacho fight, I figure it will be like a Hagler-Hearns fight. I'm going to come right at him, and I know he's going to be right there. I know he can't take it to the body, so he better be doing his sit-ups. Unfortunately, we will never know. It's a dream fight that unfortunately just didn't materialise. Emmanuel Stewart actually did come out and say he gave his opinion after that sparring session and obviously later on, and he said they will never fight, but Whitaker would beat him again.
It's one of them fights, isn't it, where we really don't talk about that potential fantasy fights that we've discussed on our episode for the main BTR Boxing podcast feed, and this is actually one we never really discussed or never really comes up in the stereotypical fantasy fights, but it's one that should be really looked into and a one that I would, based on that information, would definitely favour Pernell for, given the first-hand account of Emmanuel Stewart. Now, after winning his 7th pro fight, Whitaker was out for 4 months after breaking his right foot, but he actually returned on March the 9th, 1986 and defeated John Montez, who was 29-3, by a unanimous decision over 10 rounds. Whitaker had used his right hand almost exclusively from the 4th round because he'd broken his left hand. The following day, Whitaker had to undergo surgery at Lenox Hill Hospital to repair his foot and hand. And following 2 more victories on points, he took on Alfredo Lane 14-6 on December the 20th, 1986 at the Norfolk Scope in Virginia, defeating him on an easy points decision. Now, Lane was actually famously known for beating the great Wilfredo Gomez. Now, he was an aged Gomez at this point, of course, that was advised by his own physician, Dr. Bobby Munez-Zayas, not to take the fight for health reasons, but this was still a very good win for Whitaker in only his 11th professional fight.
Definitely so. An excellent win and one, obviously, with the injuries as well. He's coming along nicely. And he needed that first real test. And his first acid test came in the form of Roger Mayweather, who was 26-4 at the time, on March 28th, 1987. Once again at the Norfolk Scope in Virginia for the vacant NABF lightweight title. Now, there was a bit of needle between these two after Whitaker actually punched Roger in the chest during their medical. You can see this on YouTube. It's quite funny in the build-up to that fight. And Mayweather was looking for another title shot, but was knocked down by a left in the very first round in what ended up being a terrific scrap in the end. Whitaker was put down by a right-hander in the 9th, but went on to collect his first real significant title by unanimous decision.
3 months later, Whitaker picked up a routine warm-up fight victory with a first-round knockout in Houston, Texas, of Jim Flores, who was only 1-6-1, before heading back to the Norfolk Scope Arena to defend his NABF lightweight title and capture the vacant USBA lightweight title against Puerto Rican Miguel Santana, who was 21-1-1, on the 25th of July, 1987. Santana ended up becoming a former world champion after his win against Greg Hagan, which was changed 20 minutes after the fight due to it announcing that he'd miscalculated the scorecard. Eventually, this decision was overturned 18 years later after Santana actually launched an investigation into the fight and was awarded the title. Whitaker didn't need any judges against that Puerto Rican though. He put him down twice in round 2 before proceeding to give him a one-sided beatdown throughout until the referee had seen enough and stopped the fight in the 6th. But what an absolute little crazy story in the middle of all that, talking about Pernell's career. Miguel Santana there going 18 years later after the fact and managing to get the decision overturned.
It's an unbelievable story, that 18 years later. So in actual fact, it was a former world champion that Pernell beat there quite convincingly, but just in story for one of his opponents there. And Whitaker's 16th fight was a title fight, finally, against Jose Luis Ramirez, who had a fantastic career record of 100 wins and 6 losses. And this was at the Stade de Livendale in France for the WBC lightweight strap, which was agreed on October 1987 and would go on to become one of the most controversial decisions in world boxing. Now, Ramirez had captured the title after Hector Camacho had vacated in 1987 by edging out Terence Alley in a very close decision. The year before, the Mexican actually had moved to Paris and was fighting mostly in his adoptive nation of France, hence why the fight was in France. He was an excellent fighter, with 5 of his 6 losses coming against world-class opponents, as in guys like Ruben Olivares, Alexis Arguello, Ray Mancini, Edwin Rosario, and Camacho. Now, Whitaker was at his brilliant best that night, even with a broken left hand that he actually sustained early in the fight. He showed off his wizardry, ring generalship, and disappearing acts as he looked to have been the clear winner. Now, this was only for the decision to go, of course, to the home fight. Now, Judge Harry Gibbs had the fight 117-113 to Whitaker, which is probably the correct score. But the other two judges must have been watching the ring girls as they had it. Well, for Lewis Michael, it was 116-115 to Ramirez, and Newton Campos, who had it 118-113 for Ramirez. An absolute disastrous card, that from Newton Campos.
It really was, weren't it? Come on. If you've watched that fight on the internet, on YouTube in particular, then you'll have seen that. It was a clear win for Pernell Whitaker. And this wouldn't be, of course, the only really piss-poor decision that would happen in his career. As the episode goes on, you will certainly hear, and probably will remember about some of the other ones as well. Now, in 1999, in the edition of the World Encyclopedia of Boxing, Harry Mullen, who was an Irish boxing writer and journalist, stated that the decision was generally considered to be a disgrace. To date, the decision is rated as on the top of many boxing observers' lists of the worst decisions in boxing history. And again, as I said earlier, after watching the fight closely, you can't really argue with them summaries. It really is one of the worst decisions in boxing history. The only one thing that springs to mind with decisions like this, and many felt the same at the time, with Lou Duva calling Jose Sullivan a thief, and Shelley Finkel said King and Sullivan fixed the fight, no question about it. Now, in information sourced from the New York Times, Jose Sullivan, the WBC president, counterclaimed there was no fixed and filed a $1 million slander and libel lawsuit against Duva and Finkel, but the suit ended up being dropped after Lou Duva admitted that he had no direct evidence that the WBC fixed the fight.
I think they were seething. Lou Duva was clearly seething. It's one thing that you do see with Lou Duva with many of his fighters. If a decision didn't go his way, he would come charging in the ring and go crazy. And I think obviously blood was very high, blood boiling. He's made these comments, and Finkel clearly. The fact is, I think there's something not quite right, especially when you look at that third judge's scorecard. It is definitely seems to me like he's been wined and dined to make sure that decision went Ramirez's way. Now, these allegations didn't come to the forefront just because of the bad judging. There was more to the story, and on November 1985, Julio Cesar Chavez defeated Edwin Rosero to win the WBA lightweight title. Now, Jose Sullivan was actually rumoured to be interested in a unification fight between fellow Mexicans Ramirez and Chavez. Following his win over Rosero, Chavez was rated number 1 by the WBC lightweight rankings. It was an unusual move because the WBC had traditionally refused to rate champions from the WBA and IBF. WBC ratings chairman Dickie Cole actually said, to be honest, the rating was at the request of Sullivan. The conclusion I'm drawing is that it was to give Chavez a mandatory fight at Ramirez.
Don King got the unification fight with Ramirez agreed, which meant that the Whitaker fight would have to be cancelled. The trouble was, ABC Sports had already purchased Ramirez versus Whitaker for the network, and their director of programming, David Downs, was not going to allow this to happen, and he said, when King made Chavez Ramirez, that's when we protested. Sullivan came out and said, I won't sanction Ramirez Whitaker, and we told him, you already have. It concerned us that Sullivan would go back on his original sanction and try to undo a fight that was already made. We told him he'd be royally screwing ABC, and he agreed, and he actually backed off. Now, Shelley Finkel said WBC executive Piero Pine approached Whitaker at the weigh-in for the Ramirez fight and shoved a paper in front of Whitaker's nose and told him to sign it for a Chavez fight in case he won. Ramirez had already signed one. We wouldn't do it. After that incident, we had a fear of what would happen.
Interesting. I think something's definitely not quite right. It was a dodgy decision, fixed fight or not. It is still recorded as a defeat, and it brought Sweet Pea's professional career to 15-1. Should be 16-0, let's be honest. But he wouldn't have to wait too long for another crack at a world title. And after 8 months out of the ring, Sweet Pea returned with a comprehensive 4th round stoppage of Antonio Carter. It was 3-8-1, definitely just a sort of a warm-up fight there, and that was in Virginia. before taking a second crack at the world title. This time it's for the IBF strap, which was currently held by fellow American Greg Hagan, who was 23-1. And on February 18, 1989, at the Hampton Coliseum in Virginia, Whitaker produced one of the classiest performances, and in doing so, become the first boxer to knock Hagan down in the 6th round en route to a unanimous decision. Hagan actually declared after the fight, "I couldn't get punches off. He was just too elusive and too quality," and Hagan basically looked like an amateur in there. And that's something that Pernell Whitaker did against a number of his opponents.
The first time out for the title, they robbed you. You dominated the fight. This time, you seemed to come on strong just to make sure there was no question at all.
Oh, well, that should answer a lot of the critics' minds about, whether I fade in the later rounds or not. Greg was a tough opponent, and I just went out there and did the game plan was to box 12 rounds, and that's what we done.
It didn't seem like you had to make any adjustment during the fight at all. You just did it. You took over right in round one and kept it up all the way through.
Well, that's what I told you before, Alex, that I was going to go out and dictate the fight from the beginning. And, even though I don't watch tapes of fighters, the first round always lets me know what's going to happen in the later rounds.
When you're an 8-year-old amateur beginning boxing here in Norfolk, you lost your first 3 amateur fights. Did you ever dream there'd be days like this?
Well, I always dreamed. Dreams are for dreamers, and I dream, and I figured one day I would win a world title, but I wanted to win it at home, and thank Greg Haugen for giving me that opportunity.
Lou, where does he go from here?
Well, we're ready to unify the lightweight title. We'll fight anybody we want. This guy's a fighter. We're going to show. I hope to get right back on ABC again. Give us a date. We're ready to come back and fight anybody at all.
Congratulations, Lou. Congratulations, Pete.
It's a great fight for Pernell Whitaker. One that, again, if you watched his career or you've not watched his particular fight, you get to see him at his brilliant best. Definitely a fight to go and check out on YouTube, this one against Hagan. Now, just 2 months after, Pernell made his first defence of the IBF title against the undefeated Louis Lamelle. It was 24-0, and all 24 of his fights had ended within the distance, but he'd never fought anybody at the level of Whitaker. Now, on August 20th, 1989, 1.5 years after being robbed, Whitaker walked into that Norfolk Scope Arena with only one thing on his mind, and it was a unification and rematch with Jose Luis Ramirez, who at the time was 102-7. This was the detailed blueprint from Benton, what that Whitaker had applied with a pinpoint accuracy, and he said, "I don't want you running all over the ring from this guy. Just walk and slip, be a ring general, don't get cute and try and knock him out, don't load up, stick and slide, use the jab, and when you see a chance for a big shot, throw it. If you see something you don't like, walk away."
Great advice there from George Benton, and one that Cassell actually said not to load up. That was one thing he just wasn't a massive puncher. That being said, he does knock one guy out, which we'll discuss in a minute, but that's just exactly what Pernell was about, and he obviously took that advice from Benton. Now, everything began with his right jab, delivered hard and accurate, and Whitaker said, "I could have tied my left hand behind my back. The jab did everything. Off the jab came an endless variety of sharp combinations, a double hook, 2 left hands and a hook, a stunning 5-punch combination that had Ramirez throwing punches in desperation while Whitaker casually ducked and slipped everything he could throw at him. At one point, he actually sat on the lower part of the ropes, as we just mentioned earlier, with one of his sparring partners, and Ramirez still couldn't hit him. Tiring of that, Whitaker arose and strolled away from his frustrated challenger, disrespectfully turning his back on his beaten opponent. Obviously annoyed by the champion's antics, Judge Sid Nathan gave the last round to Ramirez, but he gave the fight to Whitaker, and his scorecard read 117-111. In the opinion of judges Larry O'Connell and Miguel Dante, Whitaker did not lose a single round. O'Connell, who scored the last round even, had the fight 120-109. Dante gave the champion a clean sweep, 120-108. After the fight, someone asked Whitaker what he would have done if the judges had repeated the Paris robbery. And in his words, he said, "They never would have got out of the building." He said it laughing. They, as in his hometown fans, would have locked the doors. "Those other guys got away from me in Paris. This time, I would have found them."
He certainly would have done. I'm telling you that now. It was good, obviously, that he got his revenge in that particular fight against Ramirez, and he just goes to show you how much of a skilled fighter he was. And you look at how much he took the piss out of Ramirez in that particular fight, and you can see that he deserved that win the first time round. What an absolute robbery! But then he comes back and just makes it so emphatic that there was absolutely nobody that could have given it any other way than a clean sweep from Pernell Whitaker.
It was just a tremendous performance, and one, I thought you watch the first one, he wins the fight. You watch the second one, he wins the fight just even conclusively. And that round where he sits on the rope is just taking the piss. Did anyone do that before? And that's Pernell in a nutshell. That's just how good he was.
Now, the new unified lightweight champion ended 1989 with a stoppage win over Martin Galvin, who has 2 records for some strange reason on BoxRec, 10-18-2 at the time and 29-15-2. And this was before Pernell was named Fighter of the Year by the Ring magazine and the Boxing Writers Association of America. He also finished the year sitting in 3rd place on the Ring magazine pound-for-pound list, behind Julio Cesar Chavez in 2nd and Mike Tyson identified as their number 1. At the turn of the new decade, Whitaker made his first defence of the unified lightweight titles against future world champion Freddie Pendleton, who was 24-16-3, and this was at the Convention Hall in Atlantic City, New Jersey. Whitaker once again showcased his skills as he continued to apply consistent pressure while not getting seriously caught in close quarters. When he did get caught, he was able to show that he had the chin to match while his fatigued opponent became desperate. He missed a lot. A clear points win was enough to retain his unified champion status.
Yeah, so next up was Ghanaian-born African legend Azuna Nelson, who was 31-1. Who stepped up in weight from the super featherweight division on May 1999 at Caesars Palace in Las Vegas. His only loss had come against Salvador Sanchez 8 years prior. Azuna Nelson, as we know, a fantastic fighter, and Whitaker dominated him. Although he did move up a weight, it was probably a tough game for Nelson. He does drop down after this fight, after this absolute battle, really, and Whitaker dominated all 12 rounds to win by unanimous decision. But the fight will be remembered for the final round when actually Whitaker lifted Nelson's leg with his right hand and tapped him on the head with his left. And the referee legendary Mills Lane, was not amused and actually deducted a point from Whitaker. Once he was just so comfortable in there, he just starts to take the piss out of a guy like Nelson. Says something, doesn't it? I mean, just how classy he was.
A southpaw, Whitaker was known for his outstanding defensive skills and for being a strong counterpuncher, but not a particularly hard puncher or knockout artist. The Puerto Rican Juan Nazario, 22-2, will probably tell you a different story, as Whitaker had the punching power to match his extremely elusive style in this particular fight. Nazario was quite simply put to sleep with a wonderful left hook that he walked into after 2 minutes and 59 seconds of the first round on August the 11th, 1990 in Vegas. Now, Nazario was making his first defence of the WBO title after beating fellow Puerto Rican legend Edwin Rosario in what would surely have been voted upset of the year if it wasn't for a certain Buster Douglas beating Mike Tyson. Now, in winning this fight, Whitaker became the first undisputed lightweight champion since Roberto Duran, adding the WBA and lineal titles to his WBC, IBF, and the ring titles that he'd already had. Now, in doing so, he moved up to 2nd place in the Ring Magazine pound-for-pound list, just behind Julio Cesar Chavez, with Tyson dropping down to 7th after his loss to Buster Douglas.
In his first defence of the undisputed titles against a late replacement who was Anthony Jones, who was 26-1, due to Tracy Spann having to pull out after suffering a cut in training. Whitaker picked up another unanimous decision, but this time he got $500,000 paycheck at the Caesars Palace Sports Pavilion in Vegas on February 23rd, 1991. A nice bit of money there for Pernell. 5 months later, at the Scope Arena in Norfolk, in front of a full-capacity crowd of 7,000, Whitaker dropped undefeated Spaniard Polly Diaz, who was 32-0 in the 7th round, as he eased his way to yet another lopsided decision. In Sweet Pea's last fight at lightweight and biggest payday of $1 million, he took on number 1 ranked Mexican Jorge Pez, who was 38-3-4 at the Reno Sparks Convention Center in Reno on October 5th, 1991. And this was a messy affair with both fighters who actually deducted points by referee Mills Lane. And Paez was actually cut over both eyes. It was another comfortable unanimous decision in the end for Whitaker, but definitely not one of his most impressive performances.
But yet he still managed to get a lopsided decision, even though it wasn't an impressive performance. It just goes to show you, even on his bad night, he was still just as good as anybody else out there, if not better. Now, in 1992, he began his ascent on the light welterweight division, testing the waters against Harold Brazier, who was 78-10-1 in Philadelphia, and then Jerry Smith, who was 12-13 in Mexico City. He outpointed Brazier in 10 and knocked out Layup Smith in the first round on the undercard of the then current IBF junior welterweight champion Rafael Pineda, who was 28-1. On July 18th, 1992, Whitaker took on Colombian Pineda in an attempt to become a two-weight world champion in front of a modest crowd of just 4,000 at the Mirage Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas. Now, Pineda was deducted a point in round 6 before Whitaker scored a knockdown in the 8th with a wonderful right hook to the body. Pineda rose from the canvas and landed a deliberate low blow right at the end of the round and then was deducted a further point. But none of it mattered, as Slick Sweet Pea won by a unanimous decision on the IBF title in his second weight class.
Pernell, I have the sense that you needed this kind of a challenge against a big, strong kid to raise the level of your game, even though it was already high.
Well, I talked about it all the time, that fights like this, big, strong guys, big punchers, make me work hard and make me rise to another level. As you seen tonight, I went out there, I dictated the fight, I controlled the fight, and the whole 12 rounds.
Did he ever hurt you, or could you feel his strength?
No, I felt like I was the stronger fighter. Moving in this weight class has helped me and helped my strength. I felt like, he was a big, strong guy, but I controlled the fight on the inside and the outside. The body attack worked, the good jab worked. Everything worked tonight. But first, I want to say hi to my boys back home, all 3 of my sons. I like to say hi to all my family back home. I like to say hello, especially to all the fans back in the Hampton Roads area.
There were a lot of low blows tonight, Pernell. None of them looked deliberate. Were you ever hurt by any of them?
Well, I was stunned by a few, but not anything to hold the time up. I didn't want the time to stop. I wanted the time to keep going. But the low blows were low, and I don't think they were deliberate, but they were effective.
Now let's talk about the future. Who would you like to fight now?
I can't imagine. You can't imagine, but I think, not for myself. I think for the world as well as the American people, that they want to see the Whitaker Chavez fight. I feel like we owe this to him. That's what HBO signed us for, and I think the people ought to have it. Not saying he's a great general, but he has another general. When you get 2 generals like that together, we're going to have an explosion.
Whitaker never defended that title and did not want to stay around at his new division for so long. After a warm-up victory to end 1992, he decided then to move in to the glamour division, the welterweight division.
He did 2-weight world champion now, and he's now moved up to welterweight, looking to collect a welterweight title. And at this point was clearly one of the best fighters. It's a pound-for-pound best, really. He will be very soon. Now, before the James Buddy McGirt fight, Whitaker was already set to meet Julio Cesar Chavez in September 1993, when Dan Duva and Shelley Finkel actually didn't tell Whitaker about the agreed deal until after the fight, because they feared he might lose focus against the WBC welterweight champion, who was making his 3rd defence of the title. Now, Whitaker was guaranteed $1.25 million, and James McGirt, who was 59-2-1, who was guaranteed $1 million in a fight that took place at Madison Square Garden in New York City on March 6, 1993, in front of a crowd of 10,814. Now, in a classy fight that was fought at the highest level, Whitaker became a 3-weight world champion, winning by unanimous decision. But it was a lot closer than the decision suggests. In fact, McGirt fought with an injured left shoulder and was able to cause Whitaker problems. Just reflects how good of a fighter he was. Now, Whitaker spoke after the fight about his next opponent, who was going to be Chavez, and he said, "I was always preparing for Buddy McGirt. Chavez was not on my mind. We're going to get together. We'll see who's the best fighter, pound for pound. It's going to be a spectacle, entertaining."
A match between Julio Cesar Chavez and Pernell Whitaker was one of the most in-demand fights in boxing. At the time of the meeting in September the 20th, 1993, in front of 65,000 people at the Aladome in San Antonio, Texas, Chavez and Whitaker had been rated as the world's best fighters, pound for pound, by The Ring for 3.5 years. Chavez, the great pressure fighter, was ranked number 1, and Whitaker, the slick southpaw, was ranked number 2. Whitaker spoke of the magnitude of his fight against Chavez by saying, "This is for the best fighter pound for pound. We may be fighting for my title, but that's not what everyone is talking about. This is like going for gold all over again." But there was another reason why Whitaker wanted to beat Chavez, and that was for revenge. Whitaker cried when he watched his friend Meldrick Taylor stopped with just 2 seconds to spare in his fight with Chavez 3 years earlier, so this was going to be payback for Whitaker. He made a promise in the week leading up to the fight, and he said, "I like to go on the road and take the hometown fans out of it." Well, that's exactly what he did, as the pro-Chavez crowd was muted for large chunks of that fight, but it wasn't enough. Whitaker countered Chavez with everything he had in his arsenal of punches, and the Mexican was left confused and desperate for large portions of the fight, and there was absolutely no question that Sweet Pea dominated that fight and deserved to win. Anything from 117-111 or 116-112 in favour of Whitaker would have been the correct result on that night, and anything less was just an insult. The official scorecards read 115-113 by American judge Jack Woodruff in favour of Whitaker, but the judges, Frank Marty and British judge Mickey Vann, both incredibly scored it a draw at 115-115. Whitaker's verdict was the most accurate, and he said, "I whipped his ass."
Brilliant quote. I absolutely agree with Pernell there. He literally did whip Chavez's ass. I've seen numerous videos on YouTube where pundits have sat and described this fight, where you even had some guys even saying, trying to tell anyone that's listening that Chavez won this fight. He absolutely did not win this fight. Whitaker whipped his ass, as he said, and it was a shocking decision once again. Another bad one. He come away with a draw this time, not a loss, but still a terrible decision.
Hey, Steve, I'll tell you, I'm here with Sweet Pea Whitaker. Sweet Pea, you did it. He was hitting you low. I don't know what's going on. Tell me what happened.
Well, obviously we knew going into it that he was going to be doing the hitting on the legs. So, I just didn't let it distract me any. I just went with the game plan, the uppercuts, the body shots, and we see now who was the attacker.
This is almost like the second time that you've been ripped off, in a sense.
Right? Like I said before, that's why I'm glad we got TV and we got millions of viewers watching this one, so the public could really decide it. Okay. I knew we weren't going to need any judges.
In the Ramirez fight, you got ripped off. You had to come back and avenge it. Do you want to try again to avenge this? This is like a loss.
No, it's not.
Loss for him, not for us.
It's a win for me because the public gets to decide it. When we take the poll, you take a poll on your next show, and you'll see the ones that say he won and the one who said who lost. But 9 times out of 10, I'm just going to enjoy this one. Okay, because the people know who the winner is.
We got a pound per pound best in the world draw. What do you say about that? To get the draw, what do you say about pound for pound? Who is the best?
I feel like Evander did in the Olympics. This was an Olympics victory for us. I feel like Evander did getting ripped off for the gold, like I got ripped off for this gold. But we all, like we did, we got blood and guts. We come back, we get it back.
Lou, we're going to come back one more time?
Well, I don't know yet. I'll see my son Danny, see what he says about it. Right now, understand one thing. He is still the champion of the world. Chavez did not beat him. He beat Chavez. He got the draw. He should have got the win, so they gave him a draw. But it's a funny thing, Montel. This always happens with the WBC, with Suleiman and King. It always happens that way.
Baby. Now, the fight was judged, obviously, as a controversial draw, and it didn't sit well with the fans and the media. This was at that moment in time. The cover of the Sports Illustrated days later included a photo of Whitaker landing a punch underneath the headline, "Robbed." The morning after the fight, Whitaker said, "Last night, it was like someone put a knife in me and twisted it. I put an old-fashioned project beating on him, a housing authority beating, a ghetto beating. Everyone tried to build him up, but I condemned the building. Pound for pound, Pernell Whitaker is the best fighter in the world. I'm not just a runner, I can fight. Give me credit, give me the respect I deserve. Give me this one."
Marty and Van disagreed. They scored 6 of the 12 rounds differently, but they both came out with even scores, 115-115, ending the fight as a majority draw decision. The morning after, Van was quoted as saying, "I don't think there was an outcry. Some people thought one guy won, some people thought the other did. Who's right? We're right. I got it right, and that's it." Asked what he saw that others might not have, Van said, "Attack. That's what Chavez did. Attack." According to Marte, who said he saw Chavez dominating the fight and was rightly criticised by the media, responded by saying this: "Not everybody knows how to score a professional fight." Well, Marty's certainly right, because he certainly didn't have a fucking clue how to score that fight.
He didn't. It's quite funny that he says that as well. Everybody knows how to score a professional fight. That's an incredible quote by him. Yeah, and the other one, I mean, attack. Yeah, he was attacking. He weren't bloody hitting anything. That's the trouble. A confusing one there. You can attack as much as you want, but if you're not actually connecting, you're not scoring anything. So confusing, really was. Controversy didn't stop there with the terrible judging. Once again, there was more allegations of conspiracies. Showed its ugly head as it did with the Ramirez fight. Following heated negotiations, Texas officials assembled a pool of 5 judges who had worked fights for the WBC before. So Dan Duva and Don King were allowed to pick one each. Now, this is obviously before the fight. Reasonable compromise, maybe. Hardly, said Dan Duva, who actually said, "It was clear to me that the 5 were not among the best in the world. Early on, I suggested getting Jerry Roth of Nevada, the guy who was recognized as the best, but Chavez camp did not want Roth." And he also went on to say, "In my opinion, is that he turned it down because he had Mildred Taylor ahead when Taylor fought Chavez." Back in 1990, Duva also said that the number of WBC officials approached him after the fight, and this is what they were saying to him. They said, "What are you complaining about? This is the perfect result. Everyone wins. That's just sickening." On the day of the fight, everyone who knows me knows that I had one fear, that Pernell would get robbed, that these people, for their own political interest, would deny him his victory.
And that's, of course, exactly what they did, was deny him that victory. From this point, in 1993, the Ring magazine ranked Pernell Whitaker as the best active boxer in the world pound for pound, and that would go on for the next 3 years. Whitaker now topped a list of his era that included James Toney, Roy Jones Jr., Evander Holyfield, Oscar De La Hoya, and Felix Trinidad, to name but a few. Whitaker spoke of how he enjoyed dissecting his opponents, telling Sports Illustrated, in his words, "Most fighters don't even know what's happened to them. I've taken something from them. Their confidence, their fight plan. They can't hit you. The fight is yours. They get self-conscious about punching. After a while, they start reaching, just hoping they're going to hit me. I don't care who I'm fighting. I don't care if it's God. If I don't want God to hit me, he's not going to hit me." By January 1994, Chavez was finally beaten for the first time in his career after 89 fights against Frankie Rondell.
There you go. That was it. Should have been the Whitaker fight. I'm confused by it. Thankfully, he did get beaten because he was starting to decline slightly. Although he was pound for pound best, there was definitely, he had taken a few miles on the clock from Chavez and should have been beaten against Whitaker. Didn't happen, but Pernell continued, and he was now the number 1. And 8 months later, Whitaker disposed of Puerto Rican Santos Cardona, who's 29-3. In front of his hometown at the Scope Arena on points before accepting a rematch with James McGirt, who was now 64-3-1 at the Scope on the 1st of October 1994 for the handsome sum of $2.5 million. The rematch was nowhere near as competitive as the first, even though Whitaker was put down in the second round. And he said, "It was only a flash knockdown. He caught me off balance and didn't hurt me." In the end, he walked away with a comfortable decision, with McGirt deploying the wrong game plan by trying to load up on Whitaker rather than boxing him like he did in that first fight. After retaining his WBC and lineal welterweight titles, Whitaker said, "I just took the left hook away from him. I'm not going to give him any excuses this time. I'm sure he was in better shape this time around. That's why they call me the best pound for pound fighter in the world." The tensions turned to another rematch with Chavez, and he did say, "There's really nothing more I can do but get the Chavez fight. If I don't get the Chavez fight, there will be other considerations."
With the Chavez fight now off the table, the other consideration was to move up in weight to face the WBA super welterweight champion, who was making the 11th defence after winning his title back in 1992, and that was Julio Cesar Vazquez, who was 53-1. Preparations for the fight did not go to plan, with Whitaker's longtime trainer George Benton departing following a dispute with Lou Duva. Benton's split from main event was bitter, claiming that Duva didn't know boxing, and Whitaker was arrogant and stubborn. To fill the void left by Benton, Ronnie Shields took over as Whitaker's head trainer. Whitaker made $1.5 million for the fight at the convention hall in Atlantic City and was in full control until he was dropped by the Argentinian's left hand in the fourth after showboating. Even with the knockdown, Whitaker became just the fourth fighter in boxing history to win world titles in 4 weight divisions. And in 1994, Sports Illustrated printed Whitaker on the front of their page, and it read, "The best, welterweight king Pernell Whitaker, pound for pound fighter, the finest fighter in the world."
And completely top of his game, the absolute number one in boxing at that moment in time. And on August 26, 1995, Whitaker moved back down to the 147-pound division and outpointed British and Commonwealth and European champion Gary Jacobs, who was 54-5 at the Convention Centre in Atlantic City. Now, Whitaker was ruled to have been put down in the 11th round, but television replays did show that it was only a slip. But en route to retaining his WBC and lineal welterweight titles, Whitaker dropped Jacobs twice late in the final round. Now, the Scotsman spoke of Sweet Pea in high regard some years later, and this is what he had to say. He said, "If you want to learn boxing, watch his fights. His ring craft was incredible. He was so clever. He was almost impossible to hit cleanly. His skills were truly remarkable. People talk about great fights, particularly at lightweight, with men like Roberto Duran and Floyd Mayweather. But I think he was the best of the lot."
After a 6-round knockout of Puerto Rican Jake Rodriguez, who was 28-3-2 on November the 18th, 1995, Whitaker was knocked off the top spot in the Ring Magazine pound-for-pound rankings for the first time in 3 years by a certain Roy Jones Jr., and he slipped to third behind Oscar De La Hoya. Sweet Pea only fought twice in 1996, making a fifth defence of his WBC welterweight title against undefeated Wilfredo Rivera 23-0-1 on the 12th of April 1996 at the Atlantis Casino in Cupcoy Bay, St Martin, in front of 1,000 invited casino guests. Whitaker actually put in a very below-par performance, which he blamed on the flu, but managed to come away with that split decision victory. 5 months later, Whitaker produced a much better performance at the James L. Knight Center in Miami, Florida, again against Wilfredo Rivera, who was now 23-1-1, in the rematch, coming back from a 5th round knockdown. Although it looked more like he tripped over Rivera's left foot, Whitaker knocked down Rivera down in the following round with a straight left to the chin, as he went on to win by unanimous decision.
Yeah, and this was the beginning of the decline, really, and alcohol and drugs was something that Whitaker had to deal with throughout his life, as we mentioned earlier. But as he approached the later stages of his career, the effects were beginning to take its toll on his body. Clearly he wasn't going to be able to be doing the same techniques that he was showing when he was a lot younger. Now, the early stages of his decline were never made more evident than in January 24, 1997 at the Atlantic City against the undefeated Dio Belez Hurtado, who was actually an undefeated fighter at 20-0. Now, when you actually look at the fight, it's a good fight. It's just the beginning part of the fight where basically Whitaker is dropped by a right in the opening seconds of the fight, and then again in the 6th with a right-left combination. Both times he rose to his feet and he did laugh it off. But you could see him sort of laughing, and he knew it did shake him a little bit, and he was wondering, you could see almost in his head, he's probably thinking, why am I not able to do the same things? But behind on the scorecards and chasing the fight from that opening round, Whitaker went in search and destroy mode, which is something you didn't really see with Pernell, something we would have liked to have seen probably a little bit more. He was unaccustomed to it, the slick southpaw that he was. But Lou Duva tried to advise Whitaker to use his jab and not rush his work as he went in pursuit of a one-punch knockout. Now, in the end, Whitaker managed to catch Hurtado, which sent him back against the ropes and finished him off brutally in the 11th round with a series of unanswered punches. It was a great finish, but he was a bit desperate and he was lucky. And many thought the referee waited too long to actually stop the fight, with Michael Katz of the New York Daily News writing, "Referee Arthur Mercante Jr. stood by frozen. He looked like he was a bit shocked and just didn't know what to do." It was a great comeback from Whitaker as he went on to retain the WBC lineal welterweight titles. by the skin of his teeth. But it's definitely a fight where you start to see that Pernell is slightly on the decline now, or he is on the decline.
By April the 12th, 1997, Pernell Whitaker was sitting in the top 5 of the pound-for-pound rankings, but it was the undefeated super lightweight Oscar De La Hoya, who was now 23-0, that had emerged as the new king of world boxing. De La Hoya was in his prime, and Sweet Pea, as we rightly discussed, is slightly on the slide. The venue was the Thomas & Mack Center in Nevada. De La Hoya was the favourite and new to the 147-pound division. And both were set to earn big money, with De La Hoya looking at getting $10 million and Whitaker $6 million in a fight quite simply billed as pound for pound. It generated a handsome 720,000 pay-per-view buys and a $28.8 million pay-per-view revenue. Wow. Now, there is absolutely no doubt that this was a very close fight with 5 or 6 rounds that could have gone either way, but once again, for the third time in Pernell Whitaker's career, the scoring was pretty terrible. De La Hoya was actually caught in the third. Whitaker had a point deduction because of it, but caught De La Hoya off balance and put him down in the 9th. It was neck and neck throughout, and all 3 judges scored it to De La Hoya, with Chuck Giampa giving it 115-111, and both Dalby Shirley and Jerry Roth 116-110, which I think both of us found quite baffling that it was given to De La Hoya and given in that fashion. Now, according to a Las Vegas Review Journal poll of writers who covered the fight, 14 actually scored it for Whitaker and 11 scored it for De La Hoya, and then 1 scored it a draw. Pernell said after the fight, "I was robbed. What happened to me tonight was like what happened to me before. It was a blowout, a shutout. I could not have performed better. The people saw it, the world saw it, I saw it. I want a rematch." Now, we wouldn't call this a robbery as such, but this was a much closer fight than the scoring suggests, and we can only encourage you guys to go and watch the fight back and cast your own judgment upon how this fight went down. If anyone has any similar scores to Shirley and Roth, it'd be very surprising.
It certainly would, and I think it was a much closer fight. I mean, you could give it to De La Hoya, you could give it to Whitaker. A draw, probably more reasonable. He may edge towards Whitaker, but it was very close. There's no way De La Hoya won it by 5 or 6 rounds. That's, again, it's just something doesn't sit right with me, and it just seems to be, once again, third time Whitaker, a bit of injustice on the judges' side of things. Now, Whitaker's win over Andriy Pestraev, who was 21 on October 17, 1997, was actually reversed to a no decision when he actually tested positive for cocaine. He was suspended for 6 months by the Massachusetts Pico Gaming Commission, but the WBA did not recognise the suspension, asserting the positive test was invalid. Now, the suspension was lifted by the commission when Whitaker, who proclaimed his innocence, agreed to submit a random drug testing over a 6-month period. And after failing one of those random tests, Whitaker actually entered a drug and alcohol rehabilitation centre. So he offers the random testing, and then they do it, and he fails it. The rehabilitation forced the cancellation of the fight against WBA welterweight champion, who was Ike Cortez, on April 25th in Las Vegas. I think after that De La Hoya fight, you're starting to see that, obviously the drugs and alcohol are taking its toll on Whitaker, and to suggest a random set of testing and then he gets randomly tested and fails, I think it says a lot that he was obviously having difficulty at that time.
With all the problems Whitaker was facing outside the ring, it was no surprise when he had a long absence. It was actually 16 months in total, and Whitaker reflected on that and he said, "It cost me a year of my career. It was something that happened and he's over." Interestingly, his next opponent was the undefeated Felix Trinidad, who was 33-0. And he also had a lengthy layoff as well at this time. Trinidad had not fought in 10 months due to a lawsuit he filed against his promoter, Dodgy Don King, in June 1998 for fraud and breach of contract. Now, after a federal judge ruled against Trinidad in November, he signed a new contract with King. On February the 20th, 1999, at Madison Square Garden in New York, Whitaker was fighting in his 23rd world title fight, putting him alongside legends such as Manuel Ortiz, Wilfredo Gomez, and ahead of even greater names like Sugar Ray Robinson and Emil Griffith. Now, Pernell was challenging for the IBF welterweight title, and in the fight he was floored in the second round with a straight right and even broke his jaw in the 6th, but he somehow fought on for another 6 rounds. This was the first time in Whitaker's 45 fight career that he'd actually suffered such a convincing defeat at the hands of a prime Felix Trinidad. One judge had it 117-111, while the other two had it 118-109, all unanimous to Trinidad over 12 rounds. As you've rightly pointed out previously with the De La Hoya fight, although it was a close fight, I think you can start to see the signs of decline. The issues with the drug problems, the cocaine problems outside of the ring. He takes 16 months off, comes back, and you can see that time off hasn't really done him any favours, because he comes back and he's not the same fighter against Felix Trinidad.
He isn't, and it's definitely the one fight in his whole career where he's beaten, and he's beaten convincingly. All those other defeats on his record, honestly, you can't say he lost any of them. It's just, for me, he should have, at this point, it's whatever he's been doing, he's obviously taken its toll, and he should have decided then, or someone should have said in his ear, that it's time to walk away. You've earned a nice bit of money. It's just going to retirement. And funny enough, Whitaker did retire in 2001 following his loss to a Mexican. Again, this is Carlos Bojavez. I can't even pronounce his name. I'm going to call him Carlos. So this again, it's another defeat on his record, but he was nowhere near the Pernell Whitaker we had seen. Now, although records suggest that Whitaker was stopped in his last fight, he did actually break a clever call in round 4 and was forced to retire, ending his professional career with a record of 40 wins, 4 losses and 1 draw, including 17 by way of knockout. Whitaker said after the fight, "I am done. I can't keep suffering these injuries. I'm not even going to think about it." So, in a sad turn of events, though, 2 days after the fight, Whitaker was actually admitted to a hospital in Virginia after his girlfriend called 911 and said she believed he was having a seizure on the bathroom floor. When pressed by the person handling the call, she suggested the cause might be cocaine. Whitaker was released from hospital the following day and claimed a mixture of pain, medication and alcohol led to his hospitalisation.
Wow, it's just another crazy story about Sweet Pea Pernell Whitaker that I didn't really know. I mean, obviously this was, going back 20 years ago when all this sort of stuff happened, and at the time it wasn't as well publicised over here in the UK. You think about what we've got this day and age, the way we have that connection with the USA and the sort of news channels. We didn't have that then, so it wasn't as well publicised unless you was a really avid boxing fan at that particular time. So it's a bit of a crazy story to sort of end his career, but I think we've got to look at what happened for him after boxing. I think we've got to discuss what his life was like after boxing. Now, after he did retire, he actually later worked as a trainer in Virginia Beach, guiding boxers such as Calvin Brock and Zab Judah. In the midst of all them struggles with the cocaine and alcohol addictions, he actually nearly overdosed in March 2001. He was charged with possession of cocaine on Virginia Beach in August of that year for bringing the drug into a courtroom during a hearing on a traffic violation. So he's still having these problems outside of the ring. He then pleaded guilty in January 2002 and was given a first offender status, which allowed him to avoid a felony conviction. Whitaker was then sentenced to 27 months in prison for violating probation on another cocaine conviction in 2003. The judge, Thomas S. Shadrack, said Whitaker arrogantly thumbed his nose at probation rules after his 4-year suspended sentence in August 2002. He violated the terms of that arrangement and was convicted of cocaine possession. Whitaker turned himself in to the police in January 2003 while he was free on bond, but was arrested for driving under the influence on February the 14th. He was eventually moved to the Indian Creek Therapeutic Centre where he served the remainder of his prison sentence while receiving treatment. On December the 7th, 2006, Whitaker was actually inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame along with contemporaries such as Roberto Duran and Ricardo Lopez. They were all elected in their first year of eligibility to go into the Hall of Fame.
In February 2014, Whitaker made national headlines after he evicted his mother, Novella Whitaker, out of the house he purchased for her shortly after he turned pro. Now, apparently, back taxes were owed on the house, and Pernell said that neither his mother nor his siblings, who also stayed in the house, were doing anything to help keep the house afloat financially. Pernell's lawyers said that he is not making the same kind of money as a trainer as he was as a boxer and needed to sell off the home to satisfy his tax debt owed in order to prevent the property from being seized and put into foreclosure. Outside of Virginia courtroom, where an eviction proceedings took place, Whitaker called the ruling in his favour and he called it a beautiful moment. A year later, tragedy struck when his son Pernell Jr. actually died in 2015. So on July 14, 2019, Whitaker was crossing the street in Virginia Beach at the intersection of Northampton Boulevard and Baker Road when he was actually struck and killed by a car. He was 55 years old.
Gone too soon, as they say. Absolute tragedy for that to have happened to him. Just when it seemed like his life was starting to get back on track again outside of the ring, we lost a great in Pernell Whitaker in July of last year, and it was one of the reasons why we really wanted to get this episode out to everybody as well. And I think we've gone through some of the negative things that happened outside of the ring, which is part of obviously the episodes that we like to bring to you, but there's only one real way we can end this episode, and it's obviously on positive notes. He had an incredible career. He became a 4-weight world champion, winning titles at lightweight, light welterweight, and super welterweight. He was also the undisputed lightweight champion and the lineal lightweight and welterweight champion as well. Pernell Sweet Pea Whitaker actually currently holds the longest unified lightweight championship reign in boxing history at 6 title defences, and is regarded as one of the greatest defensive boxers of all time. Now in 2002, The Ring ranked Whitaker as the 10th greatest fighter in the last 80 years.
There is no more Pernell Whitakers. Let's make one thing clear. There is no more Pernell. There will never be another Pernell Whitaker. My style is second to none. It's in the closet now. It's not coming back out here. To be successful with that defense. My defense, I like to do the matrix, man. I want you to miss. Yeah, I want to do the matrix. There will never be another decade like the 90s ever. The greatest fighters in the world come from out of the 1990s. So that whole decade, you'll never get another decade like that of great fighters. And you can chase the money all you want to, but you still got to get your ass in the gym and train. And telling the other 90s that everybody wanted to fight the best fight. Everybody wanted to compete against the best. Not cherry picking no fights and picking fights. You know you're supposed to win these fights. You want to get in there with the best fight. I think it's only fair to do that for the fans. People who watch you or subscribe to watching you or pay pay-per-view. The fans want to see the best fight the best. And I think they deserve to have that.
Wow, I mean, what an accomplished fighter he was. He was just a fantastic fighter to watch. He wasn't a slugger. If you like sort of your phone box fights, as we say, he's definitely not a fighter for you. But if you like to watch someone's footwork, someone's movement, head movement, and just the way he was like a magician. He could just disappear and he could fight in the pocket. Then Pernell Sweet Pea Whitaker's your man. And the acknowledgements, we'll start with, I mean, Sweet Pea was nothing short of remarkable between the ropes, and Bert Sugar called him a modern-day Willie Pep, only with more charisma. He was, in his words, an artist.
The former world heavyweight champion George Foreman said it was like watching a cat with boxing gloves. He said he had the best balance he ever saw in a boxer. And you had Jim Lampley, the HBO boxing announcer, and he said you could stand in front of you and you couldn't find him. He would smile at you and demonstrate to you, while smiling, how remarkably easy this was for him. Of course, Pernell did everything the hard way in life and in the ring, and this is personified by Kathy Duver, the chief executive of Main Events, who recalled her telephone conversation between Whitaker and her husband Dan, who died in 1996, and she said, "I could hear Dan telling him, 'I'll get you an easy fight for a breather,' and Pete would say, 'I don't want no easy fights.' Dan said, 'I can get you a couple $1 million, but Pete would say, 'I don't want no easy fights.'" I think, as with everything in life, sometimes we don't always appreciate the accomplishments of these elite sportsmen and women that are currently active in the field at the time. And Pernell actually told an interviewer in 2018, "I've been getting more appreciated since retirement. I get more acknowledgement now than I did when I was fighting."
I think that's pretty true. That is one thing we don't necessarily do with our sportsmen and women. That we don't necessarily... We always think that the past was better. In actual fact, sometimes an absolute legend is right in front of you, and I think Pernell was definitely that guy. He just wasn't... I think a lot of people do and did regard him as one of the best. Obviously, one of the pound-for-pound best for a long time. I still don't think he quite gets the acknowledgements necessarily as some other fighters do. Maybe because he just wasn't a devastating puncher. I think that may be the reason. And some people don't quite understand what they're looking at. But a masterful boxer, an absolute natural at it from a very young age. As we've said, from the age of 13, he was demonstrating these skills. And even as an amateur, he's dusting up Hector Camacho. I mean, it just says everything about him. And it continued. And obviously, if he was on, as people have said, drugs, if he was on crack cocaine and drinking throughout his whole career, imagine if he didn't, he could have been even better, which would have been even more incredible considering what he achieved.
The thing is, you would never have known if he was on that because you could never tell in any of the performances other than when he got to the latter end of his career, which we've spoke about in the episode. So if that was a true story or remotely true, how did he do that? And how good could he have been? Even better, he would have probably gone down as one of the, if not the greatest fighter pound for pound of all time. Pound for pound was invented because of Sugar Ray Robinson. Many people believe he's the best pound for pound fighter ever. People always regard Muhammad Ali as the best fighter ever. But Pernell Whitaker has got to be around about that top 10 mark as one of the best fighters that have ever graced the squared circle. Look what he did in his career, 4-weight world champion. We've absolutely enjoyed sitting down to discuss his life and his career for this episode of a fighter who epitomises the art form of hitting and not getting hit, and that's what boxing essentially is all about. As much as we love our slugfests and our Gatti Wards and our Hagler Hearn fights, the artistry behind boxing is something to behold, and Pernell Whitaker really epitomised that. So it's been a great episode to sit down, and one that I've really thoroughly enjoyed, and obviously one that we've picked for a change. Johnston, it was a great pick from yourself to obviously do Pernell Whitaker. So for fighter fans, if you've enjoyed this episode, of course, please let us know what you think of it. Drop us a message on the Facebook page, the BTR Boxing Podcast Network. You can find us on Twitter at career_profiles. Let us know what you think about it. Drop us a DM if you've got any recommendations for the series. The series is only running for 20 episodes, so we've only got a few more left to go before we call it a series and then move on to season 2 later on in the year. So please let us know of any of your recommendations and we'll try our best to get them done, of course. So fighter fans, if you've not already subscribed to the podcast, go to Apple Podcasts or Google or any available podcasting app. Make sure you subscribe. It's free. You get all the episodes when they come out. If you're on Apple, make sure you go and leave us a 5-star rating. It really does help. It gets the word of mouth out there to people that are looking for boxing podcasts like this. It's been another enjoyable episode. You've been listening to the career profile of Sweet Pea, Pernell Whitaker.
The dream is made real! Ricky Hatton rocks the world!
How do you like it? How do you like it?
I wish I was 50 years younger and I'd kick your ass.
It's over!